Hello genealogists, this is Craig and this is Just Genealogy, and today we're going to continue on our journey through the genealogical proof standard. Yesterday we talked about the process map, and we talked about the high level of the process map, and we talked about how there were sources, information, and evidence. And today we're just going to focus on sources. And you will find in Evidence Explained, in the chapter that we're actually going to go through again in the future, in Fundamentals of Evidence Analysis, on page 24, the words that we're going to talk about today. So what are sources? Sources are artifacts, books, digital files, documents, film, people, photographs, recording, websites, etc. Sources are classified according to their physical form. I agree with all of those except one. I do not consider people to be sources. I consider what is written down that people say to be a source. I consider a diary, for example, to be a source. I consider I guess what I mean is people not being people can be a source. But if a person says something to you, unless you transcribe it down, and then the source is the interview, not the person, then I guess people can be a source. But I don't trust people. And I never consider people to be a source. It's just unfortunate. It's one of the problems we have in genealogy today, because just because you say it doesn't make it true. Just because you find it on the internet doesn't make it true. So, sources are anything except people. Now, the products of people are sources. A tomato can be a source. I don't see how, but I know it's possible. It could be an heirloom tomato and therefore some sort of artifact. I don't know. I consider everything to be a source. And sources have to have physicality. Words do not have physicality unless they are recorded. Words do not have physicality unless they are transcribed. You see my point? That's why people are not sources. Their words, when transcribed, are sources. Their words, when recorded, are sources. But people themselves are not sources. At least in my mind. And please remember, I do not represent the Board for Certification of Genealogists. I only represent myself. I do not speak for them, I only speak for me. Can't wait to hear about this one. So, in the old days, there used to be two kinds of sources. They were original and they were derivative. Original means just what it says. The first instantiation of a source. And they say material in its first oral or recorded form. Now, recognize that with the exception of books that say first edition, you don't know when you look at something whether it is in fact on the surface the first oral or recorded form. So you have to figure that out. Examples would be testimony of someone relating to events that he or she personally experienced or witnessed. It has to be written down somewhere, somehow, even if it's after the fact, long after the fact, or an original document created by a party with first-hand knowledge of the information recorded. So a derivative source is material produced by copying an original or manipulating its content. For example, abstracts, compilations, databases, extracts, transcripts, translations, and authored works such as historical monographs or family histories. This causes a problem because the contents of a derived work could be actually based on original. You could have, for example, the image of an original in a family genealogy, yet that family genealogy would be derived, but there's original information in it. So published things created a problem in being able to differentiate whether something was original, because you could say that the family history was original because it was the first time it was recorded, which makes no sense, because it is derived from many sources. So they came up with this thing called authored works, which is a hybrid of both original and derivative materials produced by writers who study many different sources, each personal conclusions, and present new and original pieces of writing. So we got around this conundrum of fighting over what was original and what was derived and what was authored, by creating something called authored, which could be a catch-all for just about everything. So we're able to solve that problem. But all this, in my mind, is not focused on what's important. What's important is determining whether what you're looking at is the first instantiation, the first instance, the first time something occurs, or whether it is a copy of that first time somewhere else. Now, if it's a copy of that first time somewhere else, that could be okay if it's a transcript. If that transcript is in fact a true transcript. If it's an abstract, if it's in fact a true abstract. There's no problem with having something be derived or authored. I mean, they're not worse than the original necessarily, but you always want to focus on finding that original. Many times you could have, my best example is I've got a guy in my Scott One Name Study database that I have like 7 different dates of birth for. Which one's right? I don't have any originals. All I have are derived or authored works that tell me what his date of birth is. Or, here's one for you. My great-grandmother, Florence Matilda Manning Bealey, has 3 marriage dates. She has a marriage date which is in a church record. She has a marriage date which is in a civil record. She has a marriage date on a piece of paper where in her own handwriting she says what date she was married. All 3 are different. Or I have a Social Security application that says her parents' names are John Manning and Anna Bradley, and another document, original document, that says that her parents are John Manning and Mary White. Which one's right? Now, I have original documents. In her handwriting, there's a document that she says when her marriage date was. Have the church record document, have the civil document, 3 different marriage dates. Now, they're within days of each other. They're not years apart. But the point is, which one's correct? That doesn't have anything to do with the concept of sources. The correctness of the source, the accuracy of the source, is not at the issue that we are going to deal with when we talk about sources. Those are issues that we're going to deal with when we talk about information and when we talk about evidence. What we're interested in determining with a source is it original? Is it the first instantiation of the record? Is it derived? Is it a derivative? Did it come from some other record? Or is it some hybrid of the two and therefore an authored work that mixes original and derivative works all together to create a new work? Let me see what other words I have to say. Oh, yes. As a rule, original sources carry more weight than derivatives. For me, they don't. Just because you have an original source doesn't mean it carries more weight. Not until you get through the entire process. In the beginning of the process, it means nothing. When you're just dealing with a source alone, outside of the concept of information and evidence, the source alone does not have more weight because it's original, in my mind. It has as much weight prior to evaluation, because you may not know whether something is original or derivative. You may think you have something that's original, but it turns out in the final analysis that in fact it's not original, but it's actually derivative. Even though original sources can err by accident or design, always remember that. Trust nothing. Never let a record stand in isolation. Derivative sources also span the entire spectrum of reliability, depending upon the form they take, the circumstances of their creation, and the skill, bias, and aim of their creators. Some derivatives might be considered equivalent to originals under certain circumstances. And an example of that would be a duplicate original. In other words, but a duplicate original is actually what? It's a transcription that's identified as being a duplicate original. So what I've tried to put across today is that there are three kinds of source. That one, people are not sources. Their words are not sources unless they are recorded or unless they are transcribed or placed in something like a diary, at least in my mind. Because people can change their minds. So I don't treat people as sources. It's the only thing I don't treat as a source. And the sources come into three various flavors. They are original, the first time around. They are derivative, the second or third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 300th time around. And they are authored, which is a combination sometimes of both, and just a way to get out of the quandary of having to decide, oh, this is original, oh, this is derivative. At this point in the process, you may make the assumption that original is better than derivative, but it may bite you in the derriere later. So at this point in the process, I don't care. It's a source. Now, I may give it more weight because it's original, but I'm not going to give it that much more weight until I look at it some more, see what information that source contains, and then see what analysis I do on that information. So this was page 24 in Evidence Explained. And tomorrow we will deal with information. And I can't wait to hear people tell me that people are sources. And you can believe that. You're welcome to. I'm sure there are people who believe that people are sources. It says right in here that people are sources. My experience is not a good idea to treat people as sources. And by people as sources, I'm referring to living people. I'm not referring to dead people. Because you know what dead people have done? They have left records. They have left diaries. They have left their words. They have left their letters. Those are the sources. So, yes, dead people and the products of dead people are sources. So dead people are sources. But living people, in my mind, living people are not sources. How's that? Does that clarify it enough? Could be frustrating. This is Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, where we've talked about sources on our journey towards figuring out the genealogical proof standard. See you tomorrow.